We're back here again, so if this is your first time watching a video of this caliber, I am glad to have you along. This is, after all, the first video of this type of 2023. My name is Amy Rosenfeld, and these are the books that I read of the summer of 2022/2023. At the start of every quarter, I take a look back on the books that I had reviewed over on my blog, amyrosenfeld.com, in the previous quarter. From there, I rank them from worst to best with some abridged reviews and comments about each as we go along. So if you do want to check out the full reviews of these books, my website is where you gotta go to. In the meantime, the spark notes of these reviews can be found within this video and you can see how they compare. Let's start with the worst. Number 13 is Rebel by R.J. Anderson. My god, has a duller magic book ever existed? Everything that was magical felt so boring and so dull, and only one character had a good personality and arc to accompany it, to begin with. And then of course it all went so boring and predictable and shallow, which was very surprising considering how much I liked the first book in the series. Knife was great. Rebel, and by association now the rest of the series, is bad. This is probably among the biggest disappointments in my life. Like, how can a book with such a good predecessor end up being so dull and boring and bad? The literal opposite of the first book. I'm gonna keep that original first book because it still works fantastically as a standalone, but if I were you, I would not delve to the rest of the series. At number 12, we have The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Great Gatsby isn't all that great. I enjoyed Nick and the writing style of Fitzgerald that accompanied Nick's personality, but the plot itself was kind of boring, especially at the start. Or there were a lot of scenes that felt like filler even though they would actually be of great importance. I don't know if this is a product of me being used to writing styles or that Fitzgerald's style is just not good. Not to mention how much tropes and stuff would be very different back then compared to how they are now. But I genuinely discovered in 2022, when my goal was to read classics more often, that a lot of the classics that I did pick up weren't that great or engaging for me. The only one that I did end up liking that I read back in 2022 was a reread of The Secret Garden. I think because Great Gatsby was a short book, it made it easier for me to finish and not want to DNF it because I knew that this slug would be over sooner. Number 11 is The Wide Window by Lemony Snicket. In short, this just felt like a reskin of The Reptile Room. I just realized I didn't even write that in my script, but that's a joke because, you know, some reptiles lose their skin like snakes. But yeah, it's just the same plot again. Count Olaf is back in disguise and he's done something bad to our guardians, so we have to work out how to save them and ourselves. I don't think I realized that when I first read this book as a kid, probably also because I read a lot of a series of unfortunate events out of order. And you know, I wasn't trained in creative writing. Even though it was one of my best subjects, I wasn't trained to the extent that I am now. And from memory, I know that the other books in this series are not like this, so that's why I'm still going with rereading the entire series. Because the content itself is good, it's just I didn't find it as good because it felt like a repeat. A bad taste of deja vu. Number 10 is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. How can a book have both so much character and yet so much cliche? I don't know how. I love the cultural inspirations surrounding the world building and the magic system that accompanied it, but the plot and the characters were just so bland and cliche, and the ways that they fitted into the world just didn't quite sit with me. It's just another light and dark magic plot with a magic academy in it that ends up turning into a MacGuffin quest. That makes little sense in regards to the world building when we get to the end of it, actually. It was too tropey for my taste, and it's probably more of a book that someone who is a fan of those classic light versus dark kind of stories would actually enjoy. The tropes combined probably are good on their own and in different settings, but just, yeah, combined, not my thing. Number 9 is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. An ending makes or breaks a story for me, so lo and behold, the ending broke it. I'm not slandering it totally, because it had some good aspects. But the ending, above all else, made me not want to keep the book and continue it or anything, or just associate myself with it. I'm gonna straight up spoil it for you because it's pretty bad. It's a twist villain who changes their entire personality once we find out they're their twist villain. So uncouth. Which was disappointing because otherwise the plot was promising. The main character a riot in every possible way. And the world building was nice, if hard to imagine. Though I think a lot of the other background characters and side characters also brought this down. Okay, now we're getting into a literal wall of 4-star books. Let's just smash our head right into it. Number 8 is Heart of the Ritz by Devenish. I did not realize how much World War II impacted France until I read this book. And I like the perspectives that I took on with the Nazi invasion of Paris and how the upper class people were dealing with such conflicts and adversities. The multiple perspectives were sometimes too much, but there were certain perspectives within that group that I found very insightful, and I loved seeing the character growths for them. Very femme power, very tense and domestic at the same time. And it puts faith into you. Reading stuff like this and then seeing how it mirrors modern history. Rich companies and people not actually being willing to help out with the crises until they're actually impacted by it themselves. But at least our main girl Polly managed to see those issues very on, and you kind of get a little bit of sympathy towards her especially. Number 7 is The Song Rising by Samantha Shannon. Thus far, this is the best book in the Bone Season series. And not because it's the shortest book either, that makes me sound like I'm slandering long books. The tight plot. Such amazing growth and showing of the characters. And great world building to see Xiran impact Ireland and the UK. You could see the little differences between different cities' cultures in such clear ways as Xiran gets their grip on them. Paige, our main character, felt at her strongest here, and the third act was full of so much tension that it was insane. This book convinced me that the series was worth reading, for sure. You could really see the character and style of the series at its highlights in this book. Number 6 is Tears of a Marigold by S.D. Huston. This was a very strong way to end the trilogy. It had one of my favorite kinds of villains where their biggest strength was in their charms and the ways that they were able to manipulate people. I love that shit. He villained so well. I find these days that villains tend to fall in a whole bunch of like cliches and are very tropey, but this guy was tropey in the best way possible. Shannon, you terrified me when you wrote this. All 3 of the sisters and their stories were very engaging in this book too. Same can't be said about the Morrigan. But those 4 main characters are very strong. This book tested their minds like nothing else, and I am here for it. Number 5 is Falling Through by Ben Pick. With strong vibes and a tight plot, this debut novel from a fellow author tube friend was a very strong debut. Like, the plot of this book has nothing to fault because of how cohesive everything is. Every Chekhov's gun got fired. So much was established, and we see a very realistic portrayal of teens that young adult books tend to fall flat on, in my opinion, especially in urban and contemporary fantasies. Knowing my audience at the time of this video, you guys would have all seen this book and read it anyway. So you've already been convinced, and I'm just retelling you what you guys already know. Also, the acknowledgement at the end of the book. I was mentioning it, I was touched, Ben. Thank you so freaking much. Also, this book is perfect for fans of Stranger Things. I'm just putting it out there. Number 4 is Beyond the Empire by KB Wagers. This is the only unsatisfying ending that I'm okay with just because it suits the story. But wait, there's more that's awesome about this. We're talking some good villains again. Yes, the main character Hale was badass and witty as usual, but the villain was that and so much more cold and calculated at the same time. Oh my god, the interactions between the 2 of them were everything for me, and in the 3rd act, we really got to see this unfold, and I was so there for it. Oh my gosh, that 3rd act. That 3rd act was everything. Literally just read the entire Android Empire series just for the 3rd act of the 3rd book. I mean, the other books are great as well, but that 3rd act, chef's kiss. Number 3 is Fractured by Teri. While not as good as the first book, this one was still a massive hit. The previous book had Kyla fight against herself, but now she's fighting with outside forces as well as herself. Such a game of trust and self-doubt and reliance has risen. I would have liked there to have been more world building, but that's like my only major critique really. Kyla is still amazing and still has such an incredible mind and experience to walk throughout this entire premise, especially now that we know why her brain is wired in a particular way. I can't wait to read the next book because so much is opened up. There's so many enemies now. Number 2 is Iron Widow by Xiran J. Zhao. I am mad at myself for having this book on my TBR for a literal year before having read it. If I had known that it was good enough for 5 stars, then I would have read it way sooner. The world building is something that you don't expect to work, but it so does! Chinese historical inspired future fantasy sci-fi tech mecha things. It's a world richer than the stock market. Plus, how is literally every character so amazing, well written, with both distinguishable personalities and motives that you could understand and either get behind or hate them because of it? They're all so real. There's literally no fault to this book, and I am so glad to have read this as the first book that I read in 2023. Oh yeah, plus there's queer main characters. We love it. So why isn't it number 1? Number 1 is The Sea of Monsters by Riordan. Is it cheating if a reread was the best book of the CODA just been? It deserves it. This was the book, in retrospect, that made me fall in love with Percy Jackson, and I forgot that it was the one that did. I forgot so much of this book. It was so freaking good. Riordan is a world-building god and makes such great, fantastic character arcs. He knows how to balance emotion with tension and comedy, and that's such a masterful thing to do. I literally cannot fault The Sea of Monsters in any way, like seriously. If you haven't at least tried the Percy Jackson series, you need to. Come on, I'm begging that you do. It's the book that not only made me fall in love with reading, but made me fall in love with writing. You know it's good, and if you haven't even read it yet, do it. And there we go, those are the books that I reviewed. Stay tuned as more book reviews end up coming up on my blog and as I release the next video of this type in early June. Now if you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe if you are new around here. You can ring that bell to find out when I post more creative content. Now if you're already a fan of Riordan's writing style, I've had reviewers point out that my book ASTER'S CODA Exposure reeks inspiration of Riordan, so you have to read it now if you're a fan of Percy Jackson and you want something a bit different. It doesn't have Greek mythology, but it has a bunch of original creatures in it that I think you're going to love. And while you're down in the description, you can check out my Instagram, my TikTok, and my website. Stay creative everybody, and I'll be seeing you in the next video.